Begin. Hello, everybody. My name is Senem Aydın-Düzgit. I am the director of the Istanbul Policy Center and a professor of international relations at Sabancı University. And I'm very, very happy today to be hosting this event, IPC, and together with publishing. I see some familiar faces and I see faces that I'm not really familiar with, which always makes me very happy because it shows that we are expanding to new people, new faces, new constituencies in what we do. Now, we normally do book talks, but it has indeed been a while since we conducted a book talk. So I'm very happy and proud that we have a very distinguished writer with us today. Professor Renata Salecl is with us today. And I'm going to introduce her to you, although I won't be able to do justice to all the work that she's done. And I'm sure that most of you are already familiar with her work. But Renata is a Slovenian philosopher and a sociologist. She's a senior researcher at the Institute of Criminology at the Faculty of Law in Ljubljana, Slovenia, and also a professor at the School of Law at Birkbeck College in London. Renata has held numerous visiting professorships at Cardozo School of Law, New York, Humboldt University, Berlin, and Duke, among other institutions. Her work is very interdisciplinary and focuses on bringing together law, criminology, the study of political ideologies, and psychoanalysis. Her books have been translated into 15 languages, including Turkish, which is exactly why we're here today, because of the publication of her most recent book and its translation into Turkish, Yerinde Saymak, Neoliberalismin Rehine Özesi. Now, together, next to Renata, we have Dr. Özgür Öğütcan, who will be conducting the Q&A today with Renata. Özgür is a psychoanalyst and psychiatrist that focuses on psychoanalysis, the critique of ideology, subjectivity, and the clinical applications of psychoanalysis. And since the early 2000s, he has written, lectured, and produced translations in these fields. Alongside a group of intellectuals, he played a key role in the founding of the journal, Suret, and made significant contributions to the recognition and clinical implementation of Lacanian psychoanalysis in Turkey. And to ensure that international Lacanian practices are known within the country, he contributed to the organization of numerous events and has frequently served as a guest speaker. And currently he serves as the director of Access Publishing, which is also the publishing house, as I said earlier at the beginning, that actually also translates and publishes Renata's books into Turkish. So without further ado, I'm going to leave the floor to you both, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much for this introduction. We have a guest maybe most of you can return up to now four books and already translated into Turkish. The last one, our publisher was published here in the subtitle from French. Livre sur la place, le sujet otage, le néolibéralisme. This isn't her first visit to Istanbul. She is familiar for our audience in America. We thank her very much for accepting our invitation. Before giving the floor to Renata, I would like to introduce her, not personally, but her talk, but about her talk, her political talk, and political talk. Renata Salecl, right? It's the right pronunciation. I asked her in Paris one time.
It's not pronounceable in every language.
Yeah, it's pronounceable in Turkish. Renata Salecl is a philosopher and social theorist. Her explores the intimate links between freedom, anxiety, law, and desire in contemporary society. Drawing on Lacanian psychoanalysis, critical theory, and legal studies, she examines how modern subjects experience choice not as liberation, but as pressure, a demand to constantly decide, optimize, and justify themselves. Her analysis shows how authority persists even where traditional forms of power appear weak, often returning in impersonal systems such as bureaucracy, law, and what distinguishes Salecl's work is her ability to connect abstract theory, such as with everyday experience. She writes about love, failure, obsession, self-blame, not as personal weakness, but as structural effects of social organization. In an era that celebrates individual freedom and responsibility, Salecl reveals the hidden cost of desire, anxiety, guilt, and a deep uncertainty about desire itself. Her work invites us to retain freedom not as unlimited choice, but as a difficult confrontation with the limits that make desire, commitment, and responsibility for them. Closely associated with the critical theory, Salecl's thinking resonates with broader debates of ideology, subjectivity, and power without ever losing its ethical urgency. Rather than offering solutions or prescription, she focuses on the impasses of contemporary life, moments where freedom turns against itself, where responsibility becomes cruelty, and where desire is shaped by forces raining and knowledge. By insisting on these tensions, instead of smoothing them over, Salecl challenges us not simply to think differently, but to tolerate the discomfort that genuine freedom is. Okay, I want to talk about some types of ignorance, rudeness, not power, anxiety, choice. These are titles of your book. You question our position regarding knowledge, our position regarding other people, and our relationship with ourselves as subjects. These are all questions that Lacanian psychoanalysis also asks. The question is, how do you incorporate psychoanalysis into your own thinking? What do you think psychoanalysis has to say about our contemporary?
Thank you, It's been a pleasure in that your publishing house has decided to translate the book. Actually, from French, the book doesn't exist in English yet because I kind of didn't really know whether I wanted to translate it in English at first, and then someone translated it in French and in Spanish and so on. And then I realized actually it's not such a bad idea. And it's a real pleasure possibly have this exchange, with you and other psychoanalysts here, because we are questioning exactly the same things. How does subjectivity change in contemporary society? That's kind of my question for some time now. How does ideology shape, and how does also change in social structure contribute to new types of sufferings of people? I myself lived through the change from socialist Yugoslavia to kind of post-socialist capitalist Slovenia. We seceded from Yugoslavia in '91, and I have been through this kind of changes of what in psychoanalytic terms we would call the big other. So Jacques Lacan coined the term the big other, basically pointing out that in society there are institutions, written and unwritten rules and language, culture which shapes people through the process of socialization. And one of his famous sayings was that the big other doesn't exist, but nonetheless function. in the meaning of that there is nothing coherent about this symbolic space that we live in, but we create a fantasy of its coherence, always temporary, so that at least for some time we can have a fantasy of our own, identity coherence. And when there is a change in the big other, we experience also subjective changes, and that's kind of what you psychoanalysts are looking at. There are changes in the way people start questioning themselves and their role in society. And of course, these moments of changes are often not lasting so long. Very quickly we create kind of fantasies of the new surroundings. So when socialism collapsed, we had a moment where certain cultural, milieu, social milieu stopped being the organizing principle, and then very quickly new ideologies emerged, more nationalist ideologies, which created a new perception of the cultural space. And of course, history is written in a new way. So today, we are going through changes which are less easy to observe as this change from, a collapse of one regime to another, and kind of what we call neoliberal ideology, which has been sort of going on from the 70s on, has, I would say, created a kind of like a way, the way where it's very hard to observe the power structures of ideology, and of course, with the shift to illiberal society, the authoritarianism that we can observe in many places in the world and also here, we are again, experiencing a kind of a shift which is difficult to analyze, because it is kind of a slow cooking, like when you are pushed in a hot water, boiling water, then usually you feel it. If the water is getting slowly hotter, then it's less visible how this transition can be checked. So that's kind of my question, which I'm opening in this book, the social changes, how they affect our private lives. That's why I speak about love, parenting, genetics and so on. And also, I'm looking also at the kind of the social setting. What are the main changes in the social setting today? The shift to authoritarianism, the shift to certain kind of a cruelty. In the way capitalist system is functioning, for example, the shift to disbelief in traditional media, science, and so on, which also creates a change in regards to traditional authorities. Traditional authorities being, kind of traditional figures like parents, maybe community leaders, politicians, but also you can say some religious figures, which is not necessarily bad. The being critical of authorities is great, but we have emergence of new authorities, influencers, various self-help gurus, and so on. So there is still a desire for identification, but there is also, very much of a kind of a change in the belief. So in this society, the disbelief, the feeling that also everyone is capable to come to the answer of what are facts and what is truth, what are lies and so on. That everyone is a master of his or her own truth. That has shaped, you can say, the society. It also introduced new psychological dilemmas to people, which is why I'm not surprised that anxiety it continues, to be such a problem. A few years ago, when I was launching here my book on ignorance, there was an event in this power plant, the Museum of Power Plant. Yeah, and at that event they were also selling anxiety and the choice book, and everyone wanted the anxiety. And I was like, But there is anxiety also in the ignorance book, there is anxiety in the choice book, but like, anxiety books sold out immediately. And then I was like, what? And then some young girls, quite, traditionally dressed, headscarves, came to me and said, "Could you give a lecture at our university book club?" And I said, "Where are you from? Which university?" "In Istanbul University, and we are the department of pharmacy." Now, I have never been invited to the department of pharmacy. I never thought that, the pharmacy departments had book clubs. So I thought maybe they are interested in designing new anti-anxiety drugs, and maybe it's like a business, and they are interested. So I accept that. They created a wonderful, almost a whole day anxiety kind of themed debate. The oral anxiety book is not the easiest book that I've ever written. And then I asked them, like, why are you interested in this as pharmacists, the future pharmacists? And that idea was, anxiety is like everywhere. They study pharmacy because of two things. It's a good business, everywhere here you have a pharmacy. And the second thing, a lot of them identified with these two Turkish scientists who invented, the drugs that are linked to the biotic fur. I don't know the name, but it was the post-COVID. And there were murals of this famous couple who live in Germany, the Turkish. So many of these young men and women had the fantasy that maybe they might in the future invent something like this. Not necessarily for anxiety. Anxiety was like something they accepted and there to stay. But maybe, kind of thing with financial anxieties, I would say, to have a good business. So I'm impressed by the kind of the Turkish curiosity, coming from very different sources. And, it often happens much more in the countries like Turkey and so on, that you have the desire to learn something outside of your field.
Yeah, you're right. Some French psychologists actually, they were impressed to see the people's curiosity, young people's curiosity, and even find a way to follow their anxiety. And not understanding, they ask some questions, but not understanding. Last time, very short period of time. Maybe they find the so very easily, how can we say, easy solution to their anxiety. Maybe I asked another question about anxiety. Do you know at the time of Freud, the main source of anxiety is from the authority, stemming from authority, the type of the family control. He could control everything, and it especially some it's frightened. But do you think right now we are living in society that we are confronted in the same anxiety or different anxiety? In the world, anxiety is a solution to the preparedness of the future for the future. But right now, maybe anxiety has some other sources. What do you say?
Yeah, Freud had, I think, really interesting things to say about anxiety, which is, he uses a couple of times the example of the train crash. That some people were victims of a train crash, and they survived, and the terrible happened to them. But then after the train crash, some of them will have the nightmares. They will be also afraid of taking another train and so on. And Freud's idea was that those who had nightmares, in the nightmares we can see the anxiety, which is kind of a preparedness for potential repetition of the trauma. So he said that anxiety can be beneficial in a way for the subject sometimes, after a traumatic experience, because traumatic experience happened because we were not prepared in some way. So that's, I think, a great example about your question. Freud, yes, was focusing into linking anxiety to traditional authorities. He lived in a much more patriarchal So one of his famous examples is the little Hans, a child, who was very much afraid of horses. And Freud's analysis was that this, relationship to horses, which he called phobia, he analyzed this child's phobia, was in a way a solution for the anxiety that he had towards his father. Because the little boy was developing very close relationship with his mother and perceived the father as someone who was limiting that emotional connectedness, what we in psychoanalysis would call like a castrating, symbolically castrating figure, a man who put, kind of a law, against certain, too closeness, kind of an incestuous relationship. And when the boy was growing up, the father was starting to say, "You are not such a baby anymore, kind of don't be constantly, hugging your mother." And dealing with anxiety towards the authority figure, the father, was more difficult for the son. Something he pushed into unconscious, and the fear of horses became like an easier way to deal. So the phobia, kind of replaced the more horrible anxiety towards the authority. Now, today, I think, we are coming to another important point. Somewhere, I think it's in a footnote somewhere, he speaks about the difference between an authoritarian type of parenting and a permissive one. So his idea was that it is not usually that we see, with very authoritarian type of parenting, that the subject might develop very harsh superego, the inner kind of instance, which is sort of like an inner punishing instance, and also mocking instance, like the kind of the feeling of guilt that we develop. It might be actually the opposite, that the permissive type of parent might, lead to a more harsh, self-punishing type of a kind of the inner voice, the super, which I think we can observe today, because we actually have in many instances much more permissive type of parent. So we see, I think, a lot of different ways that people are dealing with anxiety, especially in that relationship with parents, the parents who are not putting the limits or try to be friends with them, the children, and so on, might be the authorities towards whom it is much more difficult to say no, to separate from, to deal also with their emotions, when someone says no to you. When we as parents say no to our children, we need to deal with position, with hate, kind of counters and so on, which might be really difficult for us as parents, so we try not to be the prohibitive type of figures. We're constantly negotiating with the children, like forever, and then it might be that actually with this relationship that all kinds of new problems emerge. Let me give you one example, which was written maybe about 2 years ago by James Webster, New York-based Canadian psychoanalyst. She wrote a short article in the New York Times about the type of new symptoms she observes among teenagers. And she says that she has quite a number of teenagers who would like to disappear. Like disappear in the meaning of almost self-annihilate. Sometimes disappearing might look even like anorexia. You are shrinking in some way. Or they would fantasize about disappearing from the city into the village. Like just going away from the normal life. This idea of enclosure, disappearance, we can also say often, happen, now, let's say with the social media, but also, after the pandemic and so on, with the loneliness and so on. So we have a kind of encapsulation of the subject. And then she said the discourse of these teenagers was the following. When, she as a therapist was asking them, like, why do you want to disappear? They would say, my parents are constantly, resenting me what kind of life I should be. I should have very good grades. I should go to the best college. I should be kind of active in all kinds of ways so that my future will be, perfect. And they are doing everything that I get extra to tutors and so that. And then I look at my parents, and they are miserable, constantly miserable. They come home, they're exhausted, they hate their jobs, they hate everything around them. And then actually, when I look at these parents of mine, they have done exactly what they are saying that I should do. They got the best grades, very good education, they have good schools, have good jobs, and they are like totally miserable. Why would I, as a teenager, repeat, the misery of my parents? Maybe I kind of go away, live in a little village, and do garden and have a dog. Almost everyone wanted to have a dog. Like that's kind of Slovenian rather too. A few years when I was teaching law school students, master students, we were discussing friendship, and half of my students said that their best friend is their dog. Now, this is something.
Best and only
Sorry?
best and only
The best.
Best.
I asked them why their dog, and they said dog loves me unconditionally, doesn't complain, it's always there. Like Lacan also said, his dog.
For a Kierkegaard said,
Yes.
The best friend of human is that part.
The dead body.
Yes, why? Because it has no anti-traditional attitude. I think nothing. It is the best ideal friend, ideal neighbor.
But not the dead dog.
Yeah, that's it. There you go.
Living dog.
Yes. Maybe we can end the talk about the status of the art. We learned something from two like maths. First one is there is no behavior. Second one is paid or unpaid. Of Malone is next. Je sais bien, I know very well, but what do you think to changing status of the authority into scientific knowledge and maybe improve in our contemporary society? It has so many symptoms about how to believe someone or something. For example, there is no other, as you said earlier today, but we need something. The authority doesn't mean only authority is command or how can we say, or punishing authority. It is not authority, it means also the pursuit of the desire. If transgression is possible, we need authority. If we have authority, we need desire. What do you think is the status of the knowledge, subjective knowledge, or subjective action, all of the changes situations in regards to knowledge, scientific knowledge, maybe to the some political figures, not here. We are okay, Turkey, we have no political problems, everything is okay, Turkey. But in other countries, such as it's wrong. Every day he posted 100% open lies. What do you think all of you?
Yeah, wow, we can stay here. It's a question, $1 million question. Let's start with autonomy. So autonomy, French, Lacanian psychoanalyst really, capture very well this logic of belief, where the subject has at the same time, I believe that something is not true, but sort of knowledge that something is not true, but continues to have belief. So his example, one of the examples usually used is like children might very quickly know that there is no Santa Claus. And so they knew very well that there is no Santa Claus, but still believe, that they will get presents. And, like that is behind this knowledge that something doesn't exist. They maybe believe that actually it nonetheless in some way functions. So if we look at our relationship with AI, you have tried ChatGPT and similar platforms, you might have be full of knowledge that this is not an authority, that this is not some kind of a grand intelligence behind, that there's just like data, massive collection of already existing material, texts or something. But, when you engage with this, you have that, I know very well, but, first of all, this machinery often, compliments you. What a great question, amazing. You are going in the right direction, this is exactly, what you should do. And so on. And that is something you feel good about yourself, I'm really smart, ask the right question as a follow-up. And then, suddenly you start also behaving, as if this is like something. If someone kid or that, sometimes, I feel, oh my God, should I bother with another question? Almost feeling, I bothered too much, like if I ask what is the best hotel, I don't know, I just down and I already got the list of the hotels and the reviews and so on. And it's like you almost feel, guilty, like I'm so rude, bothered with this nice, and of course, from therapeutic point of view, we know that a lot of people are using it also for therapy. And here too, we have seen now the beliefs, developing where people followed, the machine saying them how to commit suicide. We have seen with teenagers who committed suicide after discussing, their plans about ending their lives with the machine. And that's scary when you see that this identification can happen. But what you said about, truth, knowledge and so on, it's very important, of course, to understand that psychoanalysis, we understand that the subject is by claiming that he or she is searching for certain knowledge, but then does exactly the opposite. Does everything not to come close, to the knowledge. I was analyzing this in the passion for ignorance, which Lacan used in his kind of creative way, pointing out that in the psychoanalytic practice, often he observed that people came with the demand to be cured, to get some understanding of their suffering, but very quickly that did everything, not. And we can say that that's important knowledge, from Lacan, and important theoretical insight to understand also our relationship with the existing knowledge, with the existing sort of oeuvre, from science, with the kind of facts which maybe journalists are trying to work with. And what we are observing now is truly, a change, a real negative attitude towards science. This yesterday, Donald Trump decided, to openly do politically everything against, the scientific knowledge about climate change, literally pushing the United States to have more emissions, to damage the lives that people and on the planet, much more with the coal industry being revived and so on. And all the emissions, all the limitations to the global warming that they had installed to be annihilated. So we see an absolute ignorance from the top positions towards knowledge, towards what science for decades has been working. So in this climate, I think we are living really in a very, very dangerous times, because it means that, science has completely lost its power. It's really losing its power. Not only, let's say, climate science or medicine. In the United States, there have been such cuts. And, in the kind of culture of scientific organizations, also, that's like another disaster, not only in the United States, in other countries too. I'm the president of the Human Rights Organization of the Slovenian Academy of Science. And one of the most depressing meetings I have been of the presidents of World Academies of Science was a few months ago in Oslo, where we were discussing, how other academies of science are dealing with the human rights problems and also the problems of disbelief in science. And, it was unbelievable, the total cut on science globally. And let me give you just, some examples. My colleagues from Finland are fighting attack on science coming from some right-wing influencers who are mocking scientific research online, taking abstracts of the research that is funded, not only social science, even, medicine or whatever research that is funded publicly, and make it fun of it. Like, why is our country funding this? Why do we need this? And then, the colleague from Mexico was saying that's kind of happening there too, where the government is making similar, attacks, claiming why are we paying for science when we should give money directly to the workers? So, like, left populism and right populism coming together by using the same emotional, I would say, triggers of humiliation, making fun of online, attacks and so on. Which is why, some French scientists are thinking, do we need to start hiring, pro-science influencers, to counter? Isn't it like a sad situation when you're thinking about hiring the influencers, like to support science?
In here, I think we don't have the influence or decades science, right? We don't have.
Not that I know
Not now.
of.
No, but you had that protection of the Turkish genetics in the past. Of the genes. There was some legislation years ago about it.
It's it sounds very understandable. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
In Turkey.
Yeah. Science.
We have a lot of pseudo science.
Yeah, and science was very creatively used in Turkey at the start of the pandemic. There was a theory that Turkish gene, like, it's so strong.
That's also right. Maybe
Some democracy.
Well, come on.
I like to ask a question about the science.
Anyone can
I'd like to ask a question about the science. There was an example in the book, here in the assignment, about the science that I liked too much. About the DNA test. In the book, you were mentioning that the DNA test for the child is about who is the father. Maybe you can mention a little bit use of science in this way, because in this example, it's an opposite example. The science was very powerful. Even the test results are not 100%. It was used like that. There is, I think, two ways about the science. One, the insufficient science, and the all-powerful science. Can you mention a little bit this aspect?
First, I would like to thank you for translating the book.
Thanks so much.
No, I didn't translate, but I have the translation. I can say I edited, but the translator is someone else.
That would be the authority of the final manuscript.
Yes, kind of.
Yeah, the genetic thing really interests me for some time. I kind of like to see how the new developments in science are changing our anxieties. And of course, with this paternity test, which I write about, there was also a lot of manipulation, because some people, were using, I would say, science quite creatively. When they were trying to do with paternity tests, maybe sometimes they would change the sperm, in the family or so on. And of course, there was a lot of anxiety related also to just accidental findings. So about 10 years ago or so, I was invited to a big conference on genetics in England. We were celebrating some big milestone of the invention of DNA. And I gave a small talk on genetics in Slovenia, for Slovene geneticists, and there was like a very famous European geneticist who liked my talk and invited me to give the keynote to like 500 geneticists. Now, this was the most anxiety-provoking lecture I ever given. I don't have a clue genetics, I'd say. But they said, give us an outside view on genetics. So I thought, why not? So then, I started listening to other lectures. I was socializing with geneticists. Now, the first thing I was interested in was, usually the conferences I go there are quite, simple conferences. You get maybe some cookies, a coffee, and so on. Here, there were so many businesses giving you a T-shirt, like a bag, and whatever. And there were businesses who were already in genetics business or were planning to be in the future genetics businesses who had, this advertisement. The second thing was, to see actually anxiety in the most unexpected places. So I met scientists sitting next to me at the dinner, and he said, that he's dealing with so many cases when the father is not the father, like they are genetically analyzing the family, and then, he discovers that the parents don't know, let's say, maybe mother knows, but okay, the father doesn't know that he's not the father. What does he do? Like they are researching just by chance this family, and then they discover, do you tell or not tell? And then he even had the case when both parents were not biologically linked to the child. So there must have been a mix-up. So he has an anxiety. His philosophy is that he will tell only if the knowledge related to genes affects the family. Like he will not tell them that the child is not of the father or even of the mother, if it's not some knowledge that is necessary for health, whatever reason, which for me was, I think, probably the proper way to deal with, because he would probably ruin a family, which probably doesn't need to have this knowledge. The second thing which was interesting was the accidental findings, where scientists were researching something about some illness, and then, pharmacogenetic finding, which showed, that the person will develop genetic illness, which there is no cure. And when they found this that I think, of course, you as a subject of research need to in advance agree whether you want to know. But if you agree that you want to know, when you are faced with something where you are told you can't do anything, it's almost impossible for people to accept that. Everyone wants them to do something, change their lifestyle, more exercising, eat something, So we want to be subjects. We want to be able to make choices. Genetics shouldn't be perceived as something that determines it. And it's always linked to a fantasy. What we have, a fantasy, a story that we have about ourselves and, our parents, what they passed to us and so on. And just after I was doing this research on genetics, I was asked if I want to be part of the Slovenian research on the genome. So this was like really funny. I got a call from a friend who works in genetics at the University of Ljubljana, and she said, we are doing this national study of Slovenian genetics for the first time. And they chose first 23 people that will be analyzed. And he said, I saw that it's like 3/4 are men, and almost all of them are male scientists, mostly from medicine. And I thought we should have at least, some woman who is not from medicine. Why don't we have a social scientist? So I said, fine. It was interesting self-debate. Do I want to know the results, of the analysis of my genome? So my partner said, I would never want, to know. I don't want to know what's potentially coming, and I thought I can't write about ignorance and not knowing. So I said, yes, you can do my research and you can tell me, whatever, it's fine. It's fine, if you tell me the results. But I must say, I was thinking, do I want potentially have my life ruined without showing any symptoms of the future illness? Okay, so I did this test, and then at first they said that they will not give me the answers only if I develop an illness, and that is research might help with discovery of which medicine potentially works better. But then suddenly, after 2 years, I get like a phone call from the research. Now we will give you all the answers. So I said, fine, and then they send you like a list, and basically you don't learn much. It's like, yes, it appears that there is no grave illness, but it's kind of, it looked almost, I would say, pointless. So the promise of the knowledge without really there being clear knowledge.
I would like to ask something about the belief and ideology, and maybe enjoy your using history concepts, for example, in your text. In the past, I were in my 20s as a kind of wrong reading of the outcomes there. We were living in the ideology, control and determine every single objective position. We are kind of puppet of the ideas with completely wrong reading of the artificial is but I would like to ask you this. In which level the ideology is operated? Just on the conscious level, or only on the daily life attitudes or behaviors, or something else on the unconscious level? Because I think this dividing is extremely important for us, because if we don't do this discern the two things altogether in different direction, we believe naively something like, if we change our public thinking about neoliberalism, like education, we are educated, liberated, enlightened, anti-capitalist subject, okay, everything is fine. I think it is very naive way of the ideology. What do you think about this? What the psychoanalysis also contributing to this formulation of the ideology?
Yeah, this is a very important question, and it's sort of like really contributed to my using psychoanalysis in my work early on in my life, because I also started with a huge fascination towards Louis Althusser and Michel Foucault. And my first work was on Michel Foucault's disciplining of the minds of the people in school. Like how you mold the subject into the kind of the future subject that you are trying to create. Like education always has a kind of a motive that they want to create a particular kind of subjectivity. And I saw that in Michel Foucault and also with Louis Althusser, we come to a limit in analyzing the mechanisms of ideology of power, of micro mechanisms of power that Foucault is speaking about when he's analyzing the disciplining in society. That you don't have enough analysis of the subject. So the subjective element, which is linked to the desire, the conscious, the fantasies, the reasons, enjoyment are not taken into account. And that's where the link to psychoanalysis, particularly Lacanian psychoanalysis, is very important to analysis. So, already in Althusser, of course, you have a very important point that ideology functions through a way. It's like the way of ideology which allows you to see society around you as given, as kind of unquestionable, functioning, and so on. So you are in a way, you're kind of that is sort of ideology is something that clouds your vision. That is already kind of this idea. And with psychoanalysis, you see that ideology actually operates in a crucial way on the subject by, changing, by affecting the desire, by affecting the reasons of the subject. And with the subjective changes, we can say that you also have ideological changes. So it's two-way street. So if you look at today's times, how ideology is functioning, how it is affecting the subject, I'm analyzing this in the book, which is coming in Turkey in a few months on rudeness. So I was looking at how contemporary ideology is playing on the kind of the jouissance in incivility, the enjoyment in using really rude words to humiliate someone. How humiliation, putting someone down, operates from many layers of society. Let's say we have more and more political leaders who are speaking in an incredibly incivil way, and there is a jouissance in listening to them. Not that you necessarily want to copy them, but the jouissance linked to that transgression. Like you can observe a person being vulgar as a kind of a jouissance similar to, you might enjoy observing a movie where the criminal is winning. You don't want to become a criminal yourself, but in some strange way, you're siding with his or her transgression, as if the person is transgressing for you sometimes. And it's like they're daring, their disregard for law. So we have now more and more leaders who give, I don't give a damn, about prohibitions. I'm beyond them, and that's where we might identify in an unconscious way that we want to transgress also, but maybe we don't transgress, we just enjoy observing the transgression. Someone is transgressing for us. And then you have the jouissance, discrimination part of how corporate world is functioning. With the whole ideology of cruelty, which I also look at this in this book, this neoliberal cruelty, the idea that you are totally displaceable, that you can be fired. Even if you remember, Donald Trump, became famous with The Apprentice, where the most important sentence is, "This is not fired." And, I can't stand television shows, cooking competition, or I don't know, whichever competitions, because of the cruelty. Because it's all about humiliation. Who will be expelled, making fun of, and so on. And, this is changing the society. So, this is like what is changing. There's, not ideology per se in the way that, what are kind of the social beliefs, but the fabric of society. And here I want to give an example of how, the fabric of anxiety of society, is sort of changed, how we become different in our relationships towards each other. And a very nice example is from Sigmund Freud's group psychology, where he speaks about the idea of justice. And he says that the idea of social justice relies on the idea that I limit myself, but I hope that others are limiting themselves also. That this idea of equality, justice relies on a certain, I would say, kind of self-repression. And then he gives this example of these times. It was quite important during the COVID to analyze it. He says, let's take a person who has syphilis. And he says that this person with syphilis might be envious of others who don't have this disease. And, actually, might want that others are suffering too, But, the social fabric taught him that he shouldn't infect others. So, he repressed this, kind of envy. And, consciously, he's behaving in a way that he's not damaging the lives of others. So, we see this, importance of the unspoken things in society and certain kind of limitations on the life. And, during COVID, I was quite, shocked by so many examples in different countries where people were intentionally trying to infect others. That's kind of why going back to Freud was important, where you could see that when the fabric, is changing, actually it might become much more relaxed to, cause damage to others. And we saw during the COVID how the inequalities very quickly became visible, how, various businesses, politicians, and so on were using COVID to control people or profit, from vaccines and so on. And you saw the crumbling of quality in society, which is why we could say that there were also, aggressions on the level of social among people.
Maybe one more question.
The original title is Creation Class. Why not female?
Yeah, this was just in Slovenian. It was like, if we translate in the English running on the spot, I just wanted to show that in the neoliberal ideology, you are constantly pushed, to work harder, to work on yourself, to perfect yourself, and so on. And this ideology has created, this kind of empty running. So we are constantly running. We're always exhausted. Where are we running? That's kind of the question. And the pressure. So just to analyze this pressure on the subject from what I call the neoliberal ideology.